Except for those thoughts, in which I presumed the close future or saw things from another perspective, I lived entirely in the present moment. That was one of the core lessons she taught me, even if it wasn't on purpose. As I said, she kind of rubbed off on me with everything I saw in her, especially everything good, since there was not really anything bad. I didn't consider that too much, as it was highly pleasant for me and therefore didn't require many thoughts. The worries about next week, the sorrow about the past. Poetically expressed, she was the angel carrying me to painless paradise, the very paradise in any moment. But anyway, in between all those miracles and joys, I also remembered something rather unpleasant that was misplaced, but here anyway. More precisely, it was still with me in my thoughts. I'm talking about Jessica. I could completely diffuse the negativity both within Chloe and me, but Jessica was probably still the way she left us. That scene by itself was not even the bad thing, as I've seen many negative and depressed people out there that I almost got used to it. The strange thing was that it didn't make sense how she reacted. She showed herself even more affected, more dismayed than Chloe, as I'd mentioned before. And my intention was then to eradicate that entirely from the world by simply talking about it. That was also what I acquainted Chloe with when I spoke with her about my intention of clearing the air. She only nodded silently, which I saw as a confirming signal. I was in temptation to just push this red button so that someone came to our room. Well, someone was by far not good enough. It was one contra that I didn't know how many nurses were active in one shift simultaneously. So I was simply unable to figure out my chances of success in case I chose that way. The second contra that spoke against it dealt with the abuse of such mechanisms which are meant for emergencies, that should save lives. But even then, who determines something as an emergency? What level of significance is decisive? After all, the second contra, which was transmuted into a pro-argument more or less, convinced me that it was the best way to go. And for my personal case of emergency, when a nurse other than Jessica came, I had already a plan B prepared. I mean, that stingy sensation in my neck can't be normal. Perhaps it would be better when someone took a look at it. Yes, I considered the aid of congruence. Emergency situation, emergency lie. So without further ado, I informed Chloe about my plan, after which she only kept on nodding. Again, I interpreted that as a positive feedback, and then I pressed the button everyone healthy constantly avoided. As I did so, I witnessed a red light originating from the device, which resembled almost a remote control. And as a consequence, I had to wait. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then the door opened already. But slowly, piece by piece, totally in contrast to that emergency I initiated. To my surprise, it was even Jessica entering. But even though it seemed like my plan worked out perfectly, there was something off. Because Jessica didn't wear her typical white long doctor's coat and those matching slippers, but instead a leather jacket and further down, other black clothes. Nevertheless, I smiled at her faintly against all odds, while I welcomed her. In my first statement, I remarked the small time span she needed to respond to me. But my happy mood soon kind of disappeared, as she brought forth that her shift was over, and that she didn't respond to anyone. Wait, that means you're here because you're about to leave soon, and not because, well, She frowned at me in utter confusion as she asked, "Aaron, what do you mean when you say that I responded to you?" At that moment, I acknowledged that something was definitely not in its place. I mean action and reaction. The reaction, according to which Jessica appeared again, was based on our agreement that she'd return later. But my action of pushing the emergency button has not revealed an equal reaction. I kind of hit the remote behind my back to cover the red light. But that was in vain, as the door opened again, that time much faster and also with a more corresponding person. The nurse who started her shift came directly to speech and demanded the cause of the emergency. Right when she completed her sentence, I saw Jessica conducting a subtle facepalm motion. It was then obvious to her what I meant with response. On my side, I was totally out of justification. I even forgot my plan B. Chloe didn't even seem to have a plan B, so both of us just sat there in silence. Only good old Jessica could pull us out of the mud as she constructed a plan B for herself at the speed of light. Zarar, everything is fine. Aaron's emergency is settled. I did it as a last deed for my shift. To make herself authoritarian, she concluded. And now leave us alone, you noodle, or I will eat you. Apparently Chloe and I were not the only ones who became dragged into her choke vortex. Her colleagues were also part of that, as I've presumed due to Sarah's reaction. But be it as it may, it worked, unlike my plan, and the highly explosive situation was diffused. So that's what you did, she summarized. I took a deep breath when I looked around to avoid any eye contact. I'm sorry, I almost whispered. Nothing happened. I guess we're all a little bit off track due to that impending amendment. I nodded and took that as transition to come straight to the point. Look, Jessica, I didn't overlook your reaction this noon before you left. I have talked to Chloe and we will now talk to you. Indeed, my time here ends, but I promise that I will return. The statement was said in absolute honesty, but because of my exams at school, I can't come over every day, but I will return. To my amazement, she showed no big changes in expression. She then only gazed at Chloe and made such an encouraging movement as if she demanded from Chloe to do something. When I followed the line of eye contact, I observed Chloe, who shook her head slightly to indicate a clear no, referring to a topic I could only estimate roughly. Suddenly Jessica continued with that sign language when she shrugged to ask why not. It was clear that they, in quotation marks, spoke about me, but they did it so desperately that it was even difficult for themselves to understand. Otherwise, they would have used common language. As a last expression of that sort, I saw Jessica also shaking her head, but this time to resign. Whatever she wanted to convince Chloe of, she gave up and returned to usual speech, which was then not more understandable either. The earlier, the better. You know that, Chloe. Chloe's head sunk a little bit to the ground as she nodded in reluctance, but her hush didn't change, so that Jessica came back to my topic, in which I also found involvement again. So yes, Aaron, come and visit us if you have time, but be aware that you'd rather focus on what is than what will be. You have seen how fast things can change. Subsequently to those obscure sentences, I saw Chloe's head falling down a little more. She was able to understand a much deeper meaning than I was able to. There was just no other explanation than that, according to me. Enjoy the time the two of you have left here until the day after tomorrow, because then some things will change, undoubtedly.